And there I was, and it was, oh my gosh, I am having to learn that I might not be able to expect anything, that uncertainty is the truth of our lives, actually. And I have no idea how long I'm going to live. And so how do I dance with that truth, which was really just moment to moment being alive and being grateful for the fact of being alive, no matter how long I was going to have, because I didn't know how long I was going to have.
Welcome to Empowering Leadership, a podcast from Dorrier Underwood. Join us as we explore new perspectives on leadership and discover what it takes to be effective as a leader. Here's your host, Doug McVaden.
It's my great pleasure to welcome to the Empowering Leadership podcast, Kristi Nelson. Kristi, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You're the author of Wake Up Grateful, which we're going to talk about, your outstanding book that has awakened me in a certain way. And, you know, that whole idea of waking up grateful every day, that's so not how I, think of waking up, right? Yeah. And in fact, the wake up call I had was getting a dog about 10 years ago and noticing that she wakes up grateful, like every day the same, like so happy to see me. The tail is just going. I'm like, wow, what would that be like? And, you are part of answering that question. What is it,
I'm so glad.
Right? Like, what does it take for a human?
Yes.
Right? Because it's sort of easier for me to see it. Well, yeah, look at her life. I think I might wake up grateful too, but I'm a human with responsibility and sadness and sorrow. And
yes.
Okay, so I would like for, you just to tell us a little bit about your journey. Why do you end up writing a book like that?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Well, we'll take it one piece at a time.
Yeah. So I was super moved to try to convey some of the things I learned from being on this cancer journey that was pretty epic in my life. In my 30s, I was diagnosed just actually 30 years ago, exactly almost, with stage 4 atypical lymphoma. And it was the end, that diagnosis was the end of a very long journey that took me to getting diagnosed. 9 months, hospitalized a lot, like most of the time, a lot of the time, in incredible pain, losing physical functioning. They could not figure out what was going on. Meanwhile, the cancer was just having its way with my body. But it took 9 months to get me diagnosed, and then 9 months of treatment after that.
Stage 4.
Stage 4.
In your 30s.
In my 30s, right? So the cancer spread to my spine, so I wasn't unable to walk, and now I can walk. And I had an amazing surgeon.
Our listeners aren't looking at you, okay? But are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The spine didn't work? I mean,
right.
That's like, okay, so now I need to find out how that happened.
Right. So the cancer went to my spine. I had to have part of it removed. I'm all fused, my lumbar spine, chemotherapy, radiation, all that stuff. And then it left me with the journey of trying to maintain the perspective of, I am so lucky to be alive, because that's what I experienced when I came out of that whole time, 18 months, was I could not believe what it was like to be alive. Instead
of, I can't believe this happened to me. Isn't it horrible that this happened to me?
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what you weren't sitting there thinking, isn't it horrible? My whole life has been ruined.
This is so interesting that you're saying this, because my dad, who right now has Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and he is the most really just incredibly moving person in my life. And I was with him on Friday, a few days ago, and he said to me some really moving things, but he said, you are one of the only people I know who's gotten a cancer diagnosis and did not say, why me? And I said, well, I think I felt like, I just went moment to moment through the whole experience. And it was more like, why not me? All kinds of people have to suffer so many things. And why is it that we think that we get to be an exclusionary clause in the whole human experience? Like, okay, I'm not going to have to suffer.
Right. But that's such an objective perspective. And most of us are much more subjective than that. It was all about, it's happening to me and I am the world because, it's my world. So that's a remarkable, I think your father's right. that you would actually have the experience that, of course, how many millions of people have cancer that you should think you're going to be an exception somehow.
Right, exactly.
But that's the thought you had.
And I think it was really a journey of not knowing, embracing uncertainty, big time. That is a hell of a journey. And in your early 30s, it's a huge exception to the norm in my peer group. People who are just starting to feel like they were fixing on buying houses where they want to live, the love of their life, retirement funds, what their professional journey was going to be, getting married, having kids. And there I was, and it was, oh my gosh, I am having to learn that I might not be able to expect anything, that uncertainty is the truth of our lives, actually. And I have no idea how long I'm going to live. And so how do I dance with that truth, which was really just moment to moment being alive and being grateful for the fact of being alive, no matter how long I was going to have, because I didn't know how long I was going to have.
Wow. I'm talking with Kristi Nelson, author of Wake Up Grateful. So take us all the way back, Kristi, to that first time before you knew. You told that kind of fast, but this happened to you not as a cancer diagnosis, as it does for many people. They just learn it in a medical setting. Something happened to you. What was it?
Well, I got fevers and I was sick. And, so I ended up in the hospital because I had fevers of unknown origin, FUO. It's called fevers of unknown origin, which at the time I was living in Manhattan.
FUO. It's so symbolic.
Yes, it is. FUO.
I got it. Okay. That's all you're telling me is FUO.
And that was my diagnosis for a long time. And things kept getting worse. But the primary diagnosis was fevers of unknown origin, because this was the time, so 1992, 1993, when HIV was becoming rampant, when, I had a lot of things that were confusing to them. I came up tuberculosis positive, which was like, who knew, where was that? And so I ended up in isolation. When they decide to look at your body centimeter by centimeter from head to toe over and over again, and they biopsy everything that can be biopsied, and they, I had so many different biopsy surgeries and stuff, they're going to find all kinds of stuff. So there I was, and the journey was long, and the journey was...
And it's not all relevant stuff. That's your point. They find stuff, but they find like everything. And so what's relevant to the fevers is still another step.
And it was confusing. It's confounding. Medicine doesn't have all the answers. We tend to think that we go into a hospital and we're going to come out with a conclusive diagnosis fairly immediately. Give me one scan and there I go. Well, my experience was the opposite. And I think I came to respect the challenge of, I got shuffled between, I'd be in the oncology wing, then I go to the infectious disease wing, then I go to I was in New York Hospital for quite a while. But the fevers didn't abate. And so I was often in isolation because I was, pretty sick and my immune system was pretty wrecked. But the learning for me, Doug, was being absolutely alone a lot of the time and being in a place where I was completely separated from people, and learning what I could and couldn't control in life and what I had charge over and what I didn't. It was an acute, advanced learning opportunity. It was like, the degree I never signed up for.
So it's like going to a monastery on a mountain or something.
It was.
Where you have to deal mostly with your internal dialogue.
It was exactly that. It was kind of the silent retreat I didn't sign up for. It was an amazing, what became really a spiritual journey for me personally. And whether you call it a spiritual journey or not, it was a journey of a lot of awakening. It was a journey of a lot of insight and reflection and awareness that grew in me. And then all of that time then resulted in this diagnosis, this really difficult treatment for 9 months. And then when I got out, I wanted to live out all of that insight, the reflection, the awareness, the awakening. I wanted to be alive for every moment that I could be alive. And when you get out of a hospital and you've been in there for a long time, it's incredible to hear a bird sing. It's incredible to be in the sun. It's incredible to have a body that can move again.
It's easy to wake up grateful. At least those first few days.
First few weeks, first few months. And here's the key. The key is, and the book is really about, and my life is really about, what would it look like to practice taking nothing for granted?
Yeah.
So that everything becomes the unexpected gift. Everything that you experience is something that's more than the nothing that could be. And for me, that was my awareness that I took into my life and brought everything into this extraordinary sharp relief, a pretty joyful awareness about what it meant to be alive, which was, things really shifted for me from when I became sick to when I wasn't sick, which is the things I used to complain about in the beginning, I didn't complain about anymore. It was like,
yeah, not because you had decided to complain or because you became disciplined, it's because you really just didn't have that complaint anymore, given what you had been through, right? So it's like, well, what's interesting is getting to that without having to get a stage 4 cancer diagnosis.
That's why I wrote the book.
In your 30s. Yeah.
That's the long answer that we finally got to the answer.
Now I finally got my answer. No, exactly. I totally got my answer. Exactly. And so, but let me ask you something. You mentioned that spiritual experience of, not of your own seeking, at least not in that format. What would you say your relationship to being on a spiritual journey was before this happened to you, and how did this alter it?
I would say it was highly abstract and theoretical.
Okay.
And when I got sick, it became a really lived experience of surrender. That whole recognition of, instead of trying to push the river, what it meant to really let go and be a leaf in the river. And that became a real lesson and teaching for me and how to navigate a journey that was really, really hard. And that I knew that it required certain aspects of my agency, right? Certain aspects of showing up, of asking hard questions, of having instincts and intuition that were different sometimes from doctors. Like, it doesn't mean lacking in agency or empowerment or being really present in all of those ways and giving everything over. It meant being discerning and learning what that discernment was.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, discernment was a big teaching, and what was mine to know and what was mine not to know.
And discerning the difference.
Yep.
Yeah. From the spiritual teachers that I've experienced, from Ram Dass to people like the Dalai Lama, the idea that it's not from you, but it's through you is so prevalent. That's what anything that I've gotten a hold of has always had that quality, but therefore it can come through you. Like, I got that what you're saying is, it's not that you're pointing to some teaching. You're saying you might as well listen to me as anybody, because I actually went through it. So here's what it is. And it's a universal thing you're saying. You're not saying, follow me or be like this.
Not at all.
But you are saying there's some things to do to be effective, and you want to pay attention to them before you're forced to pay attention to them.
Yes.
Is that a fair way to say it?
It is true. I think these are universal teachings. They're both secular. They're related to emotional health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health. I think social health, a sense of belonging. I think when we get perspective, when we wake up to what really matters, and this can happen, like, people have radical wake-up calls. All kinds of people have wake-up calls that are not just about an illness that's potentially life-threatening, but, car accidents or, kind of major acute or chronic illnesses, things that happen, losing a job, losing a partner, losing a child. So these things that are wake-up calls, like, what do I and don't I get to be in charge of in my life? I think these questions are huge, and they teach us that we don't get to take time for granted, that we don't get to take time for granted, that we have no idea. And when we really live with that awareness, like, what does that feel like? It feels intense. It is not always like this mellow jello kind of an experience. Sometimes it feels like to be awake is to feel a sense of, sometimes I feel urgency. I feel the sense of the imperative, like an imperative of to heed something and to live so fully now, because who knows what tomorrow is going to bring. But when we live that way, we have fewer regrets. We have much more sense of, I think, fulfillment.
The urgency that you're talking about, because I read your book a few months ago and started thinking about these kind of things. And some of the actions that I took are to, for example, write a long letter by hand to my friend Dan in Idaho, because that would really make me feel good. And then I knew I would really have done something that I'd always kind of thought I should do.
Yes. What are we waiting for?
And what if I didn't do it? I would go, shoot, I should have just done that. And now I have. And of course, I got a fantastic response from him. And of course, now I feel much more connected. And he's my oldest friend from childhood, and it's like, there's nobody else can give me that.
Yeah.
That satisfaction.
Exactly.
Nobody else can give me that. And it's pretty deep satisfaction.
It's a deep satisfaction. And I think the question is, for everyone would be, what would you do if you knew you couldn't take time for granted? What would you do? What kinds of things would you do? How would you live? How would you be? Who would you let know that you love them? And what are we waiting for? Like that. So the opposite is, and that's a state of gratefulness. That's what we call gratefulness, is to live in that state of the recognition that there's nothing to take for granted, like really, literally. And if we live that way, there's this kind of cellular, it's like, it's a bubbling up. It's an enlivening. It's a huge enlivening of life force, of, kind of clarity. And it's so profoundly rewarding. And it shouldn't be relegated only to people who have had to face the loss of life, only when we almost lose our lives or lose something that we really is precious to us. I think there's ways to wake up that don't require that much pain. And then can we live into that? Like I say to people all the time, if you have a toothache, like Thich Nhat Hanh says, if you have a toothache, you're so aware of the toothache and you so resent the toothache. And it's like, and the toothache goes away and you forget to be thankful. Like after 2 seconds, the toothache is gone. And same thing, like you break your arm and you can't use your arm. And it's like, oh my God, I'll never take my arm for granted again. And then guess what? You get the cast off and you start taking your arm for granted again immediately. So why do we forget to be appreciative of the things that are working, of the things that aren't broken in our lives, the things that we don't have to complain about? It's like to say grace in every moment, quite literally. Like when you sit down to say grace at a meal, like I try to think of life as that kind of banquet. I mean, this sounds so la-di-da. But we sit down.
Well, I don't know. I think everybody can really, really think I'm so grateful I have a desk to work at in a room by myself. I mean, isn't this outstanding? Yeah. I'm connected to the whole world. A window you can
open. Exactly.
That's great. I love how you say this enlivening of life force. I didn't know that's what was happening to me, but I like it. I feel like I should, be on Star Trek, where you become all sparkly and stuff, right before you get beamed up, something like that. My life force has been enlivened. And I like what you said. I'm just going to quote you back to yourself. That experience shouldn't be relegated only to people who have been in deep trouble and had some crisis that you're saying. So I'm telling you what I got out, a little bit about what I got out of the book. What do other people tell you that they've gotten from this book?
Thank you. A lot. Boy, I get a lot of people who talk about how it has helped them be more forgiving, because why am I waiting to extend forgiveness someplace when that could be forgiveness becomes a gift we give to ourselves, not just to the other person, right? So that when we start to treasure life, like life, see life in the preciousness that it really is, and in the fleetingness that time is. Like time is passing all the time and it's unpromised. So how do we relate to that? Like, I think come alive, live out the things that you treasure the most. Don't hold back. What are we waiting for? What are we holding back for? So many people, and me included. And I think why I wrote the book is because to live this way is a practice. It's a moment to moment practice. We call it grateful living. This is to live gratefully is something that we have to remind ourselves of. It's not the easiest default setting in the world. Our lives, media, we're not being encouraged to live that way. We're being encouraged to live in scarcity. We need more. I need something different in order to be grateful. Oh, if only things were this way. If only I had what my neighbor has, what my friend has. Oh my God. So instead, like, we're constantly inventorying what isn't enough in our lives. that we would, I'd be grateful if I could and if I had and blah, blah, blah. And I think that practice of remembering to notice what is ours, to celebrate, to appreciate, that's a practice. And it's a big learning. And I call it actually spiritual musculature. To develop a spiritual musculature, to have perspective and maintain perspective is what we're.
So it's if you have the analogy of physical fitness, you're saying you've got to work that muscle, that
Totally.
physical, you're saying spiritual musculature, and you have to have practices the same way you have exercises. Is that what you're saying?
100%.
We'll say some of the practices for people who haven't read the book or maybe won't, but they'll listen to this.
Yeah. I think to ask yourself, what is present in my life right now that I can be grateful for? What do I have that I have taken for granted? There's so many different ways in, and I have probably about 300 practices in the book, kind of micro practices.
Yes.
But it's the practices remembering. I wake up in the morning. This is another day. Oh my gosh. A day that I couldn't expect. A day that really life did not promise me. So I get up and I say, hallelujah, like this is amazing. This is a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before. Maya Angelou says, right? This is a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before. Can we be that excited just about a new day? And then another beautiful quote. I use quotes all the time because they help me keep perspective. Marlon Rico Lee has a beautiful quote that is, be grateful for the things and people in your life. Everything you take for granted, someone else is praying for. So for me, everything. For me, one of the things that I try to focus on is, what am I taking for granted right now that somebody else would give anything for? And that can be like looking at there's a window behind you. There's a window behind me. There are people living without windows. There are people living without fresh water. There are people living who need oxygen now. We learned in COVID just to breathe, who have to have an oxygen tank, who have to be connected to all kinds of stuff. So it becomes down to everything. And so it's like, can I celebrate what is available to me that other people would give anything for? And basically the biggest thing of all, Doug, is life. Because I've lost people who matter so much to me, loved ones. There are people who would give anything for one of my hardest days.
Yeah.
The day that I begrudge, the day that I bemoan, the day that I am, rah, 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 rah. And yet that one day with all of what I have would be the greatest blessing in the world to so many people who wish they could be here right now. And that's a deep truth.
Yeah. Really great. Kristi Nelson is the author of Wake Up Grateful. We're talking about some of the practices that she has in her book. As you said, there are really hundreds of, as you refer to them, micro practices, because it really is the little things that bring us to life. That thing you talked about, enlivening the life force, that bring us to life, the little smile or the little appreciation. And, what I keep discovering the older I get is whenever I do something for somebody else, it does so much more for me than I ever used to think.
Totally.
Just in terms of it seems like it must change my body chemistry. I must be getting more dopamine or whatever it is, because for no apparent reason, I'm feeling really good about helping someone in need.
Yes, it is an antidepressant. It basically, when we give ourselves and other people the ability to be of service to other people, to enact kindness, to share themselves generously, we know that it reduces recidivism rates in prison, that it's not people who care so much about, here's what I can do for myself when I get out. It's what can I do for other people when I get out? They have all kinds of gorgeous data that when we get to tend the things that we value, taking care of a pet, taking care of another person, that when we really focus on those things, it gives back more to us immunologically, mentally, emotionally, socially, all these different levels. And I was going to name one practice that connects deeply to what you just talked about, Doug, I think, which is what we call obligation to opportunity, right? So caretaking, caregiving is often something that, and I'm doing a lot of it in my life right now with parents and kids, parents and kids both who are in need of care. And yet caregiving can be something that feels like a burden. It can be really tough and it is exhausting and it takes a lot from us. So one of the things that I wrote about in the book is switching, and even chores, like, okay, I have to go grocery shopping. I have to do the dishes.
Yes.
I have to go do this. I have to cook for everybody now. I have to clean the house. I have to do this. I have to call the dentist. I have to go this place. I have to mow the lawn. So switching it to I get to. That's the smallest switch in the world. It's one word. It's 4 letters to 3 letters. I have to I get to. Yeah. And watch how often we say to ourselves,
I have to.
I have to. And feel burdened and feel besieged by life, right? And by the things that we have to do, when really what a privilege it is to be able to get in a car and have enough money to go grocery shopping, go to a grocery store and be able to get this gorgeous food and bring it home and then cook it. What a gift it is to have someone who you love, who you can take care of, who's still here to be receiving your care.
You're telling it as a generic story. The exact thing happened to me 2 nights ago when I had all the ingredients out on the counter in the kitchen. And my daughter, who's 24, was home for a change for dinner. And I came in and my wife was busy doing something else. And I said, I guess out loud, oh, I guess I have to make dinner.
Yeah.
And started to kind of drag myself through it.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the process, I noticed that I get to make dinner for my adult daughter who's going to appreciate it. Yeah. And all the ingredients are like right here. Yeah. I don't even have to go. It's like, this is like a magic lamp. I must have rubbed the magic lamp and this popped out.
Yeah.
But I was preparing to experience it as an obligation and drag myself through it.
100%.
It's so interesting. So what you're saying is not hypothetical. No. In the slightest. It's like that is a practice because it actually alters something in the moment if you can change your language to yourself.
That's what grateful living is. 100% is what am I telling myself right now about life, about what I have to do, about the other people in my life, the circumstances. We know that those messages are hard to switch, the tapes that kind of go over and over again. And yet, if we can intervene, if we find effective interventions that help to broaden our perspective, that help to give us a relative frame of reference for our experience, it changes everything. It changes everything. And that when you start to feel what you felt when you were making dinner for your daughter from that place of joy and privilege versus obligation and I should, and I'm, right? The energy in your own body, you can't but know that is life-giving, right? That is reinforcing of life force. That's right. Good for you.
That's right. In my case, it makes my arthritis in my left wrist go away.
Really?
That's the specific thing that I have as a complaint. And I notice when I do something generous that my left wrist doesn't hurt. Wow. It's almost totally specific. And
crazy.
It's just my most constant complaint. It's my constant complaint. And then it's like I notice I don't have a complaint in those moments. I'm thinking, I don't have a complaint right now. Are you kidding me? Compared to what that person's going through, I check and even listen. It's like, well, actually, no. And I don't. So that's something and that I think is not conceptual, that is also biological. That's something that shifts biologically when we're doing that. There's a connection, right? But let me ask you something else, because you mentioned this idea of altering your language. And at Dorrier Underwood, that's exactly what we are working on with executives in our executive development programs. And so, this is the Empowering Leadership podcast. It seems to me that another way to say what you did with your diagnosis is you had to take charge. You had to be a leader. You had to declare some things. You had to be in charge of your own life. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder if you connect that what you're saying about being grateful to the idea of leadership, of being effective as a leader.
Oh, this is the big, beautiful bridge to build, right? So that's what we get to do now. I would say that the balance of holding on and letting go is one of those things. So there are times when leaders are called to show up, to have agency, to say what's so, to be directive, to be guiding. And there are times when leaders, it's absolutely about taking a back seat, letting go, letting other people show up, lifting other people's intelligence up, listening well. For me, the task and the gift of leadership and of life is to learn from everything. If you can learn from everything, if you can say, what can I learn from this really difficult feeling right now, this difficult experience, this difficult dynamic I'm suffering with somebody? If you can say, help me learn, like, okay, here I go. I'm imploring the universe, like, help me figure out what it is that I'm meant to learn here. Then nothing is for naught. And everything is in service of greater empowerment, of greater being, of manifesting and embodying ourselves more fully. We have more to bring to the table. But boy, if we miss those opportunities, I think the cost is high.
Well, also, there's an aspect of leadership that involves stopping leading. I think that's what you're pointing to. Like, there's times when you lead like a director, and leadership is more literal, like the leader is the person in front kind of thing. But then there's another kind of leadership, like, when you had that diagnosis and other people who have that diagnosis need to look at getting their whole lives complete.
Yes.
And that there's a kind of leadership that entails taking yourself out of everything. Right.
Wow, and that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right. That's you've got to be the one in charge of taking yourself out and putting something else, because otherwise you put the other people in the position of ousting you or something like that. Right. And so it's a leadership move to transition oneself, to say, I'm moving on like that. Yeah.
So a specific example I can come back to, which is that I've just left my job. I've left my position. We can talk about that in a minute. But what I'm hearing you saying that I haven't really ever thought about before and never had somebody talk to me about is kind of this idea of our own obsolescence, right? To embrace
that's what I'm talking
the
about.
Truth of our own obsolescence, and that that means uplifting. Like, I had to face so many different things in my beautiful job, which were about how to get out of the way of other people collaborating with each other. That collaboration among other members of my team was going to generate more leadership than I could generate on my own.
If they all had to go through you, or if everything goes through you, once you're there, you're such a center of gravity that I would imagine everything would go through you. You never know what the possibility is if you're not in there, right? For there to be a more direct connection. That's great. I did. 100%. That's interesting.
Not even being in the meeting. Like, it's not even about just not leading the meeting. It wasn't even attending the meeting. How do I build this organization to transcend me?
Yeah.
How do I build life to also transcend me? How do I build some relationships in some ways? And partly what I think that means, which is interesting. So this, again, I've never said this, and I don't even know if it sounds like it makes crazy sense, but I make sure that I am so present when I am where I am. When I am with somebody I love, part of why I know I could die and be at peace is because there's no one, almost no one. And if there is, I need to work on that. Just like you wrote your friend, there's almost no one who I love who doesn't know I love them. And when I was in a leadership position, there was no one who worked with me who didn't know how much I valued them. No one ever. Like, truly, that there was growth that could happen. There were challenges, but people knew how much they were valued, how inextricable they were, how much they contributed, how appreciated they were at all times.
Well, now you've just given all of us who have organizations or companies or teams a lot of work to do. You've just given us a very steep curve, but that's great. I mean, I really got what I got what you're saying. That really, if you were going to be gone tomorrow, what would be missing? And I can totally get what would be missing is telling those people how much you appreciate them and that you couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah, exactly. And also, who do we do a favor if we're so indispensable? If we haven't built teams that can function gorgeously on their own, who would be able to ask even themselves, what would Kristi do right now? That could also be included in a conversation, in an imagining, that we could bring even that into a place where it would be considered, but that we do enough to allow ourselves to be central when we need to be and to be peripheral when we need to be. And that life asks that of us too. So that obsolescence means I know I'm not going to be here forever.
Yeah.
And do I live with fidelity to that truth? Am I living with fidelity to that truth?
Yeah, very good. Right. Are you acting in denial? You're being kind of in denial.
What am I taking for granted? What time am I taking for granted? What am I taking for granted? And I think the less we take for granted, the more exquisite our lives become. Absolutely. The more joyful, the more free. And it's worth everything it takes. It's not an easy, natural thing all the time, but we can keep returning to it. It's a practice.
Great. So you've shared a little bit about the lessons in leadership from your own organization. Tell us a little bit about that organization.
Oh, yeah, it's such a good one. So I, 9 years ago, started at an organization called a Network for Grateful Living. And it is now Grateful Living. Shortened the name. There's a little mouthful there, a network for. And it was started by Brother David Steindl-Rast. Brother David is a Benedictine monk who is now almost 97 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
He's prolific. He's a mystic. He's so profound. And his insights emerged from the Second World War and surviving the bombings. So when he had those experiences, it was very similar to kind of what I experienced after cancer, which is you come out of the bombed out buildings and you say, oh my God, the sky has never been more blue. Wow. I get to be alive another moment. Like everything is vivid, right? That vividness.
Yeah.
So what he got was, it was in that experience that he lived most gratefully. And what he wanted to do was to study and understand, to become a scholar, a student of this way of living, to live gratefully. And so Saint Benedict, so he wasn't in the monastery at that time. He was just growing up as a kid in Austria. And he decided to join a Benedictine monastery because Saint Benedict is renowned for saying, keep death always before your eyes.
Oh, like what we were talking about, obsolescence. You're going to be gone.
Keep death.
Now, deal with that now. Deal with it now.
Exactly. Keep your own mortality. Keep your impermanence. And a lot of Buddhism and a lot of spiritual teachings teach that, like, embrace your impermanence and you're going to be so much more free. So Brother David started writing and teaching about this a long time ago. And he lived in a hermitage and he wrote prolifically, wrote Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer. And what basically he said is gratefulness is it's the centerpiece, if you dig down deep enough, of all religions, right? So all religions have at their centerpiece this treasuring of this recognition, this giving thanks, grace for life. So he's still writing, and they started this organization, he and a bunch of his friends, in order to bring his teachings alive in the year 2000, so 23 years ago. And I was hired blessedly in 2014. I couldn't think of a better place to bring my philosophies in life and the gifts that I have and to pay homage to Brother David and his beautiful teachings than to get to be the director of this organization. So I just finished my tenure there, 9 years of being in this beautiful role and having gorgeous people to work with and board members and staff and community members and everybody. So I just finished March 1st and I took a month sabbatical, and now I'm back in a consulting role. So I think what's also interesting about that is, can leadership re-envision itself where you don't have to be in order to bring that leadership, in order to transition out of leadership, it's not all or nothing. What is possible? Can we be creative? Can we envision things differently? And I'm kind of the both and proposition person. So I think the new beautiful leader, Joe Primo, who comes from Durham, North Carolina, and he has started with the organization. Now he comes from a gorgeous history of being a hospice chaplain and running an organization called Good Grief, which is focused on children in bereavement, children who are grieving the loss of parents and stuff. So he comes from a deep wellspring of knowing this truth that grief and gratefulness live hand in hand and teach us about each other. We learn from grief about gratefulness. We learn from gratefulness about grief. And so he's now the CEO. He's at the head, and I just bow to him. I love him. He's doing an amazing job. And so in tandem, we're going to help move the movement forward. It's bigger than any one individual. And Brother David knows that about himself. And so take these teachings out in any number of ways into the world. So the organization is absolutely incredible. And it's a nonprofit. And we don't have a lot of staff. We've always been virtual. We're global. So we serve people all over the world, about 1 million people a year. We have a mailing list of over 100,000 subscribers who subscribe to our offerings. They're all free. Our offerings, what we send out. And it's grateful.org. It's the most beautiful website. It's grateful.org. And you go there and there are practices and there are gorgeous daily offerings and things you can subscribe to and stuff. That
so anybody that's wondering like how they're going to get a hold of some of this stuff, it's both the book Wake Up Grateful and grateful.org is the new website for Grateful Living, what used to be a network for Grateful Living. Okay, great. Well, so it's really exciting. The other aspect of this is that, we've all got something in our lives that has given us a window into the way that grief makes us grateful. I've lost both my parents in the last few years, and that moment of intense grief, it's that trigger that you talk about, that you suddenly are actually grateful for your own life. You don't have to try to be natural. I mean, you just naturally are. And the other part is you're grateful for their life. And then they become more present for you, even though they're gone.
Yes.
And that's always the surprising part, so then I'm grateful that I'm still here to carry their legacy on. And becomes full circle. So I just want to thank you for being on the podcast and for surviving those 30 years ago. I mean, you didn't tell us what the medical miracle was, that, you didn't find a special drug, I guess,
That's
but you made it through. The treatments were effective against the odds.
There's no formula that I think is a guarantee, right? Except if we can live every day with joy in our hearts and gratitude for the gift of the day, that's a formula for joy, no matter how long you have to live. And Brother David says the most beautiful thing. He says, it's not happiness that makes us grateful. It's gratefulness that makes us happy. So if we're not happy for what we already have, it doesn't make sense to have a whole lot more of it. It's not necessarily going to add anything. It's like, be grateful for what's already there. And happiness is the immediate result of being grateful for life and what you have.
Well, I'm very grateful for you for being on the podcast today, and it makes me happy immediately. So it's exactly as you promised.
Thank you, Kristi.
Thank you,
Doug. I'm honored to be with you.
Thank you much.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to subscribe for free on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and a review so that other leaders like yourself can find us. Sign up for Dorrier Underwood's email newsletter by visiting us at dorrierunderwood.com. Dorrier Underwood serves visionary companies who are serious about realizing their dreams and who are unwilling to settle for incremental results. Our clients are looking for breakthrough results and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. To learn more, visit us at dorrierunderwood.com. That's it for now. Go forth and be amazing and take good care of your people. Empowering Leadership is produced by Dorrier Underwood and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.